welcome to Quantum Nurse Freedom International Livestream, and welcome to today's episode. Today is September 5, 2024, and we are very delighted and very grateful that in spite of all the difficulties in life right now, we have a lot of things to hope for. That's what I wanted to look at it. And so I invited John Waters again, and he's a repeat guest to us. So he's no stranger to some of you, but to our new viewers, thank you for being here. And please feel free to like it, subscribe, and share. John, well, how about, well, I'll just let you reintroduce yourself, because I know you don't want anymore to be called a journalist, but I know he's a political commentator and he's a truth writer and speaker. And so, John, please share how you can be connected with.
Yeah, I used to be a journalist in the mainstream in Ireland for Irish newspapers for many years, and about 10 years ago I stopped because I could see that there was something very seriously awful happening, that the corruption of the media was so extreme that this couldn't be just something normal. There was something completely abnormal at play. I didn't know what it was. I found out a few years later in the spring of 2020, when essentially the democratic societies of the world were subject to a radical coup, which confiscated all of their constitutions, charters, and bills of rights, and basically reduced them to serfdom, even though nobody actually put it like that. But that's what's happened. And so here we are now, and we're still fighting back for 4.5 years later, trying to reestablish at least some level of consciousness in our societies as to what's happening. And that, to me, is the big challenge because of the total corruption of the mainstream media. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak on your channel, Grace, and to speak with everybody. This is the only thing that will work for us, is if we can expand the consciousness of humanity to understand that the impossible has happened, that the things, that the values that they were pummeled with all their lives have been dumped. Have been trashed and no longer have any value in the operation of our societies, because those societies are now run by, not by the people or on behalf of the people, but by an invisible, hidden elite, which simply hands orders down to the people that we elected to represent us. So that's where I come in, and I have a Substack page called John Waters Unchained, which is johnwaters.substack.com. That's where I write nowadays, and I've written 10 books so far. I have another book in the works. I hope it'll come out early next year, and that's me.
Yeah, well, you heard it. So the tricky part when you search John is there's another John Waters in his name. So I would suggest that really go to his Substack first, and then maybe you can search the other video interviews or audio interviews with him, because I don't want you to be misled to another John Waters.
Is there another one? Yeah, I know there's a movie maker from the United States who, I don't know if people would confuse us. He's a gay icon, and I'm an anti-gay icon, I believe.
Well, you're the only John Waters when it comes to truth telling and truth writing. So, but for new people, just be careful. Names can be redundant, and people may have the same names, but be sure to really dig into what they're writing and they're speaking, and let your intuition really resonate to you, and then you'll be led to the right John Waters. Okay, all right. So thank you, John. And in the recent articles, the one that I put the title "How the War Against Humanity Kicked Off," because I know that's like what we've all been feeling is like there's always war against humanity. Everything seemed to be against us. So it's like, but we seem to be little people, but then we're so many of us. So I thought this would be a perfect title. But then your follow-up article, I even like it also because your article was on the fake literature and the curation of history. And
Hmm.
I begin to say that because that's what I remember as a child and growing up as a teenager on the kind of history that we were being taught. So then, at the same time, I would say that God or source put me into the path that I could be with the underground education, that I was also learning the right history of the Philippines. So it's very interesting, and how also this culture has been, it's first, the beginning is like you destroy one's culture, and so there it becomes. But I'm sure you could lead us to more of the historical events. And I am glad also to welcome today. I am glad to welcome, as usual, Drago Bosnic, and he's gonna be with us. And if you haven't met John, if you haven't met Drago, I'm introducing him to you, and
I,
he's I'm gonna pass it on to him because he's the youngest of all of us right now, and I would want to hear from the young man's mind and heart of what he sees in the future. Sometimes for our age, maybe we say, okay, we've done enough. Maybe we don't have to work too hard to let the people know what's going on. So, John, why don't you also start with what's going on with Ireland? Because in my imagination, Ireland as is very isolated, and like as if it could be easily captured, easily be whatever they want to do with Ireland if there is no protest, if there's no fight against. So I'm looking for your most latest description of what's happening there, and of course, go inspire us with what's happening with the resistance, if there's any resistance coming from Irish people.
yes, there is some resistance. It's unclear as to how effective it's going to be. Um, well, in general, what's happening is that the people are still under attack from their own government, from the people they elected to run their country, and this is an extraordinary situation, whereby the government now um, ignores the wishes of the Irish people, treats them with complete contempt, calls them names, smears them, sets the police at them with taser guns and batons if they seek to have a say in how their country, not even how it's being run, but what it is to become. In other words, the country is being remade in front and under people's gazes. There are massive numbers of migrants being flown in every day, huge numbers. Probably we have no idea how many, but we certainly know that there are vast numbers that we already actually see. But you can no longer say that you trust anything that the official state tells you. And when people say, "Well, look, these people are being brought to communities, tiny communities, maybe bus look, 300 migrants dumped in a community of 120 people. That's not unusual. It's happened very recently. Um, and when the people in that community say, "Hang on, we built this community for our own safety and protection. You're bringing in these men mainly who have no papers, no documentation, no identification." Who we don't know where they come from. We don't know what their history is. We don't know if they have convictions. We don't know what they are. And we're expected to just push over and allow this to happen without any question, without any discussion, without any consultation. And when people do this, then they're attacked by the police and smeared, as I say, by the political class and by the media, which is completely corrupt. That's one little vignette within the whole scheme of things. But there are others. The whole thing of what happened in the COVID thing continues. They're continuing. You can see at a low level, this agenda is now bubbling up again with the talk of more vaccinations, as they're called. They're not vaccinations, of course. It's a bioweapon. It's a bioweapon that's designed to kill. And many people have died. In Ireland, we have had approaching now a 20% increase in excess deaths in the last 3 years, each year, increasing actually. And just like you might actually imagine that something that like that, whatever it is due to, let's say, if there was any doubt about it, that it would, after a period begin to tail off. This is actually escalating. You can see the graph rising, not declining. And the media refuse to talk about any aspect of this, only make up lies as to why it's happening. It's to do with the weather, it's to do with climate change, it's to do with, the bad weather, it's to do with the good weather, it's, whatever, it's, anything. But the one thing that they, conspicuously refuse to discuss is the possibility that it had something to do with this injection that was taken by about 80% at least, if not 90% of the population. That this couldn't possibly be a possibility. Yeah? Well, it's far more likely than that is to do with the weather. So, but the fundamental issue, as I said before with you, Grace, is that none of this could happen if we had an honest media. If the press was honest, this could not happen. It wouldn't happen because they would try it once and they would try it for an hour or two or a day or two, and then that they would be ridiculed, they would be exposed. It would never be off the front pages. It would never be off the headlines. They would be absolutely eviscerated by logic, by reason, by truth, by decency. But that's gone. There is no truth, there is no reason, there is no logic, there is no decency anymore in the public life of Ireland. And so that's where we are, that we are as though we are muted. The people of Ireland are muted. We can only mutter among ourselves. And to be, even if we are overheard, we are abused for whatever we say. So this is not unique to Ireland. This is a pattern in all European countries, in America, in Canada, in New Zealand and Australia. All the Western countries are thus affected because they're being targeted specifically to be taken down in this coup, for reasons that we can go into. But it's an implausible scenario. In the life that I lived, in the time that I have lived, it's preposterous that this could happen. It's like something out of a bad B movie. It couldn't happen. It's impossible, but it is happening in front of our eyes. And there is no other explanation for it than that they want to destroy our civilization and do something with it. Start it again in a different place, a different way. I don't know. It's not clear. But for sure, they don't want it to continue the way it's been. And that's where we stand.
As a fellow Irishman, like you would have been aware of the financial crisis. There was people living in their cars, women with children, and basically they threw the Irish to the dirt. Then all the Ukrainians came in and they had accommodation. And now there's loads of refugees. But because there's a lot of Irish going on with their cameras and they're recording and they're asking them, hey, where are you from? And there's a load from Pakistan. And it's like, there's no war there. And I have a girl working for me and a team. And I asked her, I said, like, what's happening? Are you emptying your prisons or what? And she said, we don't walk out alone. So they're covering up because they get attacked. So sometimes there's people thinking we're getting people from prisons or asylums. Is it just our culture that's coming across? And why are we getting people from Pakistan? Which is very strange.
Well, it's much stranger than that now, because the latest is that our police force, our police force...
I saw that.
In fairness to some members of the police force, they are walking away when they see what they're required to do, to batter their own people, to taser their own people for actually opening their mouths and to ask for the right to speak about what's happening to them and their families and their children and their country and their communities. But now what are the police doing? The Guard, they're advertising in Pakistan for replacements for the Irish policemen and women who are leaving. In other words, they want to actually create an external, an alien police force so that they will have no difficulty about battering the heads of the Irish people. That's again another tiny little vignette into what's actually going on in our beloved country. Again, impossible to believe, but happening. It defies all of the experience that I lived in my 69 years in this country. I didn't imagine. Nothing prepared me for this. Nothing told me this could happen. I still pinch myself and ask, am I dreaming this? Is this a nightmare? But it's not. It's actually happening.
I've heard a few cases, and like when you hear something first time, you're kind of going, now, where they're actually putting them into accommodation. I mean, there's hotels that are, and as you mentioned, there's plenty of towns, and the police are battering the people, and they're even damaging ferry forts for people that respect all that kind of stuff as well. But I've heard a few cases, mainly in England, where they have seen cases where they're bringing in armaments, and the armaments are in storage for them. So if you hear it once, I kind of go, yeah, it's a bit strange. I'm after hearing that a lot, and I'm just curious, have you heard that? Or maybe the fellow podcasters, maybe they've have any of them heard it?
Oh yeah, well, I have, and let me be more precise and explicit about it. In the last couple of months, I have interviewed a man called Michael Yon. He's an American, former Green Beret soldier, and he has done an analysis of the Irish situation with the help of an ex-military person here, who has provided them with information data about the numbers of migrants, male migrants who are here, and the number of encampments now. And this isn't just about hotels. This is like the hotels phenomenon is one thing, but there are also camps. And if you see them, and there are pictures of them, taken by drones from overhead, and they look like military encampments, like these huts and these strange little boxes, that these guys are living in. And Michael Yon is now certain that this is an invasion of Ireland. And he says that these are soldiers, and that he has shown the pattern of the camps around the capital city, Dublin, which rings the capital in, which is, he says, designed to prevent people from going and coming to the capital whenever this trap will be sprung. And similarly, there are something like 300 other encampments. There are about 36 of those in the vicinity of Dublin, and there are about 300 more around the country. Now, I interviewed him, and I interviewed him in a tone of deliberate incomprehension and puzzlement and skepticism to a degree. Because what I wanted to do was express that in order to convince the generality of our population that this exists even as a danger, that it's even as a theoretical danger, a hypothesis, it's so far from their experience of reality that it would take an extraordinary, description and emotional communication to convey to them the potential gravity of this moment. So that was the kind of discussion we had, and I was pushing back, as it were, in a certain sense, saying, well, look, these people, they're politicians, they're ordinary people like us. We elected them, that we criticize our politicians. We have always done this. We are hostile to them in some degree, but that's not personal. And they are part of our community and so on. It's inconceivable that this could be happening. Can you get around that? And so we talked about it like that. And this is my difficulty. It's an imaginative one. And I don't say it's not just mine. I mean, of course, it's not just mine. It's much less mine than it is that of the great majority of our people, because I have the facts, and I have the possibilities, and I have the hypotheses. I know them all. And I'm not 100% sure in any given instance, how much weight I can give to a particular hypothesis. But I certainly can say this, that there is no other explanation for what's happening that makes sense. It doesn't make sense. I mean, the idea that our politicians have become all compassionate towards refugees is nonsense. They are compassionate towards nobody. They hate their own people, clearly, manifestly now, or act as if they do. So I am trying to get to the bottom of this. But what I would say is this, I would put it like this, that the very least you can say is that the political class has put the Irish people in harm's way, potentially, of something like this occurring. Because even if it is not planned, and I don't dispute that it might be planned, but even if it isn't, it is a possibility that it could occur spontaneously as a result of the antagonism that now exists between the indigenous population and those who are being foisted upon them. Because the people, Irish people, are welcoming, but they're not welcoming for people who barge in with the support of the government and hundreds of police officers beating people across the head with long truncheons in order to make them go away and let this continue. When there has been no discussion of this whatsoever for 30 years while it's been going on, first as a trickle and now as a flood. And so that's, I think, what we are faced with. That, you see, we are again in this vacuum of silence, whereby the media, which should be actually at the very least articulating these questions, batting them back and forth between different speakers with different positions, in order so that the public could tease out to what extent are their fears in this direction over-egged, whether exaggerated, to what extent may there be some substance to what they're worried about. But none of this is permitted. So instead you have this kind of silence at the public level, and then muttering, murmuring between the people. What is going on? What is going on? What does this mean? And there are lots and lots of reports of attacks on women and attempted abductions of children by these men who have been put in next door to schools in many instances and so on. I mean, it is as if all of the value systems that we have constructed and which we have lived for all our lives have suddenly been thrown in the scrap heap. That no longer do we wish to protect children. That's old hat. Let the children worry about themselves. We have a country to run. We have, migrants to feed and house. Women, women's rights. We heard this about for all of my lifetime. Women's rights. Violence against women. All this. Now, oh no problem, no problem. So long as it's a migrant, it doesn't matter. We don't try and play that trick on us now. About violence against women. You only oppose to our, compassionate humanitarian gestures towards these people. This sort of utter gibberish is being mouthed, or if it isn't, it is implicit in what is being said and what is not being said, because there is no response. And many of these crimes, as in the United Kingdom previously, as was discovered, grooming gangs, etc., rape gangs, that this was covered up by the authorities, lest they offend the migrants, the outsiders, and lest they, say something or do something that would be deemed to be racist. So we are in free fall, morally, ethically, legally. There is no law. Let's be honest. There's no law. The police force now is a goon squad, acting on behalf of the invisible elites who are really running our country. And the judges are on the same side. There is no recourse for the Irish citizen now in any conceivable sense to take this on, other than, I would say, something like a velvet revolution, where at a prearranged signal, just happened in Prague in 1989, where the entire population of Prague, literally almost, swarmed onto the streets and told their government to get lost. This, to me, is the only hope.
Do you know Gardaí? Like in Ireland, the police are called the Gardaí. Like you said, some are kind of resigning. But I mean, surely they're not that stupid to realise that what's being done is affecting their friends, family and children as well, that in the end they'll be part of the cannon fodder.
Yeah, that's not right, Why? I mean, that is a thought you would have. And to some extent, that's met by the possibility that in very many instances, what are being presented as Irish police officers are not that at all, that they're imported goons who are just put into the uniform. And it has been noticed that very few of them are prone to speak in public so they may well be English. They may well be from Northern Ireland, so they may be loyalists from loyalist gangs, etc., etc. They're goons, they're thugs. They're not trained police officers, but even the trained police officers have been very badly trained in the last while. And certainly there is no sign of anything happening within the force that you might call some kind of an ethical rebellion, which you could conceive of, that the word goes out among the police, we're not doing this anymore. I think this happened briefly in different instances during the COVID thing, for example, in France, where the police just threw down their batons and their guns and walked away from the scene of protests. But there is no sign of this happening. And I think there is an ethical deficit in those quarters, because there is a lack of understanding. You see, one of the things is the amount of propaganda that is being pumped out by the corrupt media, which is presenting this phenomenon, that far from there being a danger from incomers, from outsiders coming to Ireland and from unidentified, unpapered, undocumented young men and so on, that actually the danger comes from what they call the far right, And this far right is, of course, a complete phantom. There is no far right. The far right, insofar as it has any meaning, it is the ordinary people of Ireland when they go onto the streets to demand some form of say in the way their country is being formed and being shaped into the future. But the paper is presented as if there's some dark neo-Nazi force in Ireland that is about to erupt at any moment and snatch power. And of course, this is a lie. I mean, Grace mentioned the article I wrote about books and the way that is what is happening and it's I think an emerging phenomenon now, where books are being commissioned, or at least being spotted and promoted, books which further the narrative, the pseudo-reality that the authorities wish to tell about what is actually real and what isn't. And one of them recently, last year, was a novel which won the Booker Prize. And I predicted it as soon as I saw the book and read it. I thought at first that it was an account of, when I saw the blurb on the back, it sounded like, oh, it's a book about what's happened to Ireland. It's a book about the collapse of our liberal democracy under a coup. And I thought, exactly, yes, that's exactly what it is. This is our Irish Solzhenitsyn, yeah. But no, the book actually was a far right coup, a complete fabrication. And it was written in the years 20 and 21, when the actual coup was happening, I would presume, outside the author's very window, where police officers were battering the heads of people because they were not wearing masks, or were on buses without wearing masks, or they were in cafes without, and so on. And this book, as I predicted, once I had read it, it won the Booker Prize. And this is happening quite a lot now, I see. I'm beginning to see this syndrome now, where books which create a new history, a parallel history, which will become the only actual history at the end of a certain period. The rest will be eliminated. And unless we can create our own history, and that will be the battle. So, this is a classical kind of technique used in totalitarian societies, where they create this, object of hatred for the public to hate on. In groupthink, it's called the outgroup. That's the outgroup which galvanizes the in-group to become more resilient in the interests of the cause that they are called upon to, uphold. And so they have this specter at the window, this monster, this dark force which is trying to undo their good work, trying to tear down civilization, etc., etc., etc. This is the nonsense that's happening. But when I say nonsense, that adds a kind of almost comedic ring to it. But of course, there's nothing funny about it at all. It's deeply, deeply, deeply sinister.
Excellent. Listen, I don't want to hog the stage. I'll pass it on to one of the others there. Thank you, John.
Hello, John. It's a pleasure to have you here on the show. When I'm listening to you, I remembered that here in Germany we have the same situation like in Ireland, and the the interesting thing is we have a constitutional protection ministry in Germany, which is, let's say, very unique because it is ruled by a director who is a party member. So if this is a left-wing party, this constitutional protection goes the left-wing direction. If it's a right-wing party, it goes the right-wing direction, and it changed every 4 years. And in 2024, the director of this constitutional protection ministry, Thomas Haldenwang, said that the caliphate would be a conceivable form of government. So the situation here in Germany is, for example, if people are demonstrating for a caliphate, 1,000 people, nothing happens. If you go on the street for protesting for Palestine or protesting against injections, then you get beaten.
Yes.
And so, and we have here in Germany the ex-health ministry Jens Spahn said that in Germany alone, 5% of all Syrians live in Germany and 1% of all Afghans, people from Afghanistan. And the interesting thing is, I got the information from a man from the Secret Service, and he told me that with 60,000 people organized and structured, you can take over a government. This is the situation, and I said in the last show, if someone comes from a traumatized area, has a traumatized past, let's say all the immigrants, they come from an area where they have hunger, where they suffered a lot.
Yes.
And then they come in an area, or let's say they are welcome, and they get better treated like the own population, and see themselves in advertisement, etc. This is a psychological trick, because in that moment you give these people power, you give these people a feeling of power.
Yes.
And in that moment, the people, it's a psychological phenomenon. The people start to treat the people around them very badly because they remember their traumatization.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And they're propagandized very, very heavily in order to create this tension, this hatred, this mutual hatred, and certainly this is happening. And the numbers, a lot of these people, obviously, they're temporary proxies for something else. I mean, it would seem likely that they're only used in order to tear down the present edifice, and that when they're finished with, then they will be disposed of also, very likely, by further tactical maneuvers such as this. But there's no doubt about it that right throughout the West now we see the same pattern, that Islamic fundamentalists, jihadists, are regarded benignly. You just think about, like, going back even the last 20 years, the amount of terror and fear and apprehension that has built up about this jihadism in Western societies. And now the authorities are behaving as if anybody who opposes this or opposes its actions, it comes onto the streets to protest when, say, there's a stabbing by some jihadist or a beheading or something like this, which happens. It's happened in Ireland, of all places. We had a double murder in a couple of years ago in the west of Ireland town, and the authorities, anybody who spoke about it was accused of being a racist. And so on. This is sort of absolute gibberish, but there's a purpose behind it. It isn't just, as I say, nonsense. It's calculated nonsense. And there's a very interesting German philosopher called, at the moment operating, I think he works in the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. Michael Esfield is his name, and he has written a very interesting essay in which he talks about this whole idea that we, this puzzle, as it were, that we had when after the spring of 2020, that all of the liberal elites and all of the leftists and so on all sat on their hands as the constitutional fabric of Europe and of the West was dismantled, literally overnight. And nobody said anything about it. And what Mike Lesfield is saying is that this was inevitable. Now he realized in retrospect that once the Berlin Wall came down, that this was always going to happen. Why? Because the idea of constitutional republics, of democracy, of freedom in that sense, were ideas which existed only in the Cold War context as a way of creating a contradistinction with Soviet tyranny. And this was to demarcate the West as, an elevated, more enlightened civilization, as it were. But as soon as the wall came down and the Soviet threat no longer existed and the Cold War was over, then this was immediately almost let go. It was like, it was superfluous. It was a surplus to requirements to be extending this kind of freedom to citizens. Who needs to do it when you can simply crush them with your boot, as it were? And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think that's a very coherent view of what's happened. Well, what I think is going on here with Islam is that it is simply being used as a sucker. It's another bunch of useful idiots who are being used as proxies to destroy Western civilization. And of course, this would be very easy now, to be honest. If we actually reflect on it, apart from Drago, like we men, we're getting on in years, and that's pretty representative of the general pattern of male life in Europe and in America, and that means that the chances of actually our being able to fight back diminishes with every passing day. Now we look at Ireland, and and perhaps it's tactically inopportune to be speaking like this, but just to create a kind of a, there was a survey recently which found that the Irish Army has the numbers in it have gone below 6,000 for the first time in history, and I'm told that actually 3/4 of those are pen pushers anyway. So that's like, quarter of 6,000, say 1,500 men who was capable of putting on uniforms and picking up a gun and going out and using it. Whereas there are 120,000 plus young males from abroad who have no loyalty to Ireland or its people, who are now living in our country, being maintained by the state. For what purpose? People talk about them coming from war zones. They are in a war zone. Ireland is now a war zone. If there were a war zone that they had come from, my question again, I repeated that I've failed to get an answer to for up till now, is if these men have come to Ireland from a war zone, why are we not sending guns and rocket launchers to the women and children that they've abandoned and left to die in these wars?
The situation is, in my personal opinion, it is about the destruction of the, let's say, Christian world. This is my personal opinion. Because, first of all, with the injection, they divided the families completely. So you have no union between the people. You have no union between your family members, with your neighbors. Everyone is separated. So divide and conquer. Then, with LGBTQ, it's also a destruction of the traditional family values. This movement is also infiltrated the Christian churches. So the situation is that if you are, let's say, if you are a Christian and if you have your traditional values, you cannot find a harbor in the church anymore.
That's right.
And so the interesting thing is we here in Germany, we have really people, Christians, who think that the Islam is the only religion in which the traditional values are lived and protected. So the people get, let's say, they escape to the Islam in order to find the values which they had as Christians.
Well, it's a puzzle, this whole thing, because it seems to me that both the LGBT, whatever you would call them, I call them goons, because their purpose really was to attack people and silence them, to spread silence right throughout our lands and every land, in order that people would be afraid to even think something for fear it might show on their faces. But it's very interesting that when you look at the two respective, what I would call sets of proxies, the LGBT proxies and the Islamic proxies, they are totally at odds culturally and in every other way. I mean, the Islamists, they want to throw the other guys off the highest building they can find, right? But for the purposes of this project, they are on the same side. They are attacking, both being used to attack Western civilization. Yes. And as you say, Christendom, what previously was known as Christendom. And of course, it's very true. It's not even necessary, as it were, for European countries any longer to be devout, because most of them aren't in that sense. But of course, the residues of Christian civilization remain, and would do so for a very long time, even in the absence of practice, even in the absence of ritual. Although it's very interesting that in some European countries more than others, you can still see the very strong residue of Christian influence. For example, I go to southern Spain, to Andalusia, quite a lot, and that's where very strongly you see these religious processions regularly throughout the calendar. And people come out, and I don't know what people believe necessarily in the privacy of their own hearts, or if you go to the church, there's maybe not so many people there, and it's mainly older women, as in other European countries. But if you look at these people, they clearly relate to what's happening in the streets with these processions and the parading of icons and so on. And that's what I mean, that the vitality of that tradition, of those understandings, of that way of seeing the world is still very vibrant deep down. And that is what is coming under attack. And, of course, Islam has its own ambition to reclaim Europe for itself. But I don't see that that's part of what the plan is. I don't think that is the final destination for this project, because the people who run the world, the money men, I call them the Combine, they're the secret kind of coalition of forces, which the Combine is a phrase which I borrowed from Chief Bromden from the Ken Kesey's novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was a movie with Jack Nicholson, about 30, 40, 50 years ago, actually. And he talked about the Combine, which is a hidden dark force, which is combining, but also bearing down and crushing humanity in all kinds of subtle and not so subtle ways. And that's what's happening here. And except now we have reached the kind of the culmination point, where they're springing all their traps at the same time. And they have recruited through whatever mechanism, whether through blackmail or bribery or a mixture of both, they have recruited the so-called democratic governments of the West and all of the institutions of the West, which have all been marched through, as the Marxian phrase goes, with the view to ensuring that they will remain loyal to the Combine.
I have the point is we have to feel. You can see it in the talk shows, for example, when someone is, for example, there's an argument between the politicians, and the one politician tries to have an argumentation on an objective basis, and the other one is only attacking on a personal basis. And in that moment, you see that the whole politician theater is full of narcissists and psychopaths.
Yes.
And
Certain.
and this is what in my opinion, sometimes I have the feeling that they want to change the world in this direction, because here in Germany we have a very interesting case in the kindergarten. For example, 6 children have made a statement that a car came in front of the kindergarten, and several children were taken away in the car and were brought to people with the P, and then they came back completely traumatized, and the pants were full of blood, etc. It was very, very tough. And the major, the police, the hospital says there is no case. Yeah. Yes. In this moment. And the point is, and another mother described that she took her child in her arm and wanted to give a kiss in the face. But the child wanted to give a kiss to the mouth with its tongue. And then she said, stop. But can you understand what's going on in the kindergarten when the children learn to make such kisses, and the families and the parents say, no, thank you, we don't do this. Maybe the first time they can understand this, maybe the second time. But if they get repetition after repetition, they will feel that they are rejected by their parents because they cannot love them like they are taught to love in a kindergarten. That this is not love, but sex addiction. This is a completely different subject.
Yes, you see, this is something that we feared. You know, when you look at the way that the LGBT movement emerged into public view in the West, it was always clear that it was not an organic development. I mean, I did an exercise in this for a book that I wrote back about 7 or 8 years ago, looking at my own newspaper, the Irish Times, and looking at its editorial record in relation to the subject of gay marriage. And I traced it going right back, and it only began, you know, about 2 years before the clamoring started for gay marriage. And it was the civil unions and so on. But before that, if you read those editorials right up to, say, 2009, they were exactly what I was saying then. And then I was regarded as the leading homophobe in Irish life. I was being so called by the LGBT goons. But my own newspaper had been saying exactly the same things up to like 2 or 3 years before that. And then it stopped and suddenly started to break this other view of the world. And it has always seemed to me that this was a deeply, deeply sinister development, partly for that reason. That, you know, movements don't come like this. It takes a lot of agitation and work, even for a genuine cause. I mean, for example, in my own case, I had been campaigning for 25 years about the neglect in our laws and in our courts and our political system of the rights of fathers who were divorced or who were single fathers who had never been married, but who nevertheless wished to have relationships with their children. And I couldn't get any hearing for this at all. And I mean, if you know, there were other men and other sort of movements beginning, but never getting anywhere because there was no support for them from the officialdom or whatever, no funding or anything like that. Hostility, enormous hostility. And of course, this is all related. You know, they don't want fathers to be given rights, but they're happy to have men who bugger each other, pardon my French, to have parental rights to them over other people's children. That's not a problem. But the fathers of the children, no. Now, you got to actually, this is where I came in really to all of this. The sheer shock I saw when I saw this happening. You know, that I literally thought that I'm missing something. What is going on? This doesn't add up at all. But then all I would get was silence back, or abuse, as you say, you know, personal attacks. You know, everything is you know, about, you know, ad hominem, you know, hatred and viciousness, but no answers to the questions like, why is it that it's wonderful if it's a gay man who wants to be a parent, a father, then the state will move mountains to make it possible to get him a child so he can become a father. But if the father of a child, even that very same child, seeks to claim his natural right, biological and spiritual, metaphysical right to father his own child, his own son or daughter, he is treated like a criminal. That, to me, was the red flag in all of this. And everything really goes out from that. That contradiction is now being replicated in multiple other ways. And of course, it is now quite clear that implicit in the whole LGBT project was another letter. LGBT what? Well, they're adding all kinds of letters, but they still haven't added the P. And in my view, it's all about the P. Pedophilia.
And the P is not the last one. Then they come. Then after the, let's say, there will come, in my opinion, and I have heard this already. There will come a month of proud for LGBTQ, and there will become a month of proud for P.
Yes.
And there will come a month of proud for the next after P.
Yes, and Hartmut, you will remember, I'm sure, something that I know in a certain kind of vague and general way, that as long ago as the 1970s, there were serious initiatives within Germany to agitate for the legalization of pedophilia, involving, if I'm not mistaken, the Green Party, for example,
of
and
course.
other figures. Isn't that correct?
Yes, correct.
50 years ago.
Correct.
And what happened is
20 years ago, it was when they start, not 20 years, already in the beginning, and also in 20 years ago. But the PEEP subject is still a subject in the Green Party. Correct.
Yes. And it seemed to me that this only went underground for a while because they saw an opportunity to take out the church of using the same issue, because it would be inconsistent and incoherent. Not that they care about being inconsistent, but that they would have difficulty explaining how they were attacking the church for something that they were promoting with the other side of their mouths. But now that task of destroying the church has been more or less accomplished, and I mean in the institutional sense, they are now turning their attention to weaponizing this issue in a different way. And this is where we're going. And again, the authorities, which were locking up pedophiles, and rightly so, in the past, and pursuing child pornography and users of child pornography and so on, all of this legitimately and correctly, making sure that this was reduced to the extent of that was conceivably possible. They're now going the opposite direction. I mean, and it's a standard thing now in Ireland where, possessors of child pornography, which used to be regarded as a very grave offence, are now walking out of courts with no penalty, with basically a rap on the knuckles, or what they call the Probation Act, which is of no, so they're back off doing business again the next day. And this is the way, you can see now clearly that the intent behind the culture is to make this now acceptable and legal. And if people have are again skeptical about this, and I understand, of course it seems unlikely given all our experience, but let me just draw your attention to all the other things that have happened in the past few years and ask yourself, did you see them coming either? No, you didn't.
No. It's I thought a lot about this subject, and I got an idea. For example, I said, if I have to explain the difference between evil and the Almighty God in one sentence, I would say evil treats you as something which is exchangeable, and God treats you like someone who is unique.
Yes.
And the situation is, for example, in the military, another human life is only an object. You see target 1, you see target 2, you eliminate it. Or, for example, if you cannot explain, please, Drago, tell me if I'm wrong, but you cannot tell that human life is like a table, but you can make the life itself as an object, like a mathematical unknown in the calculation of probability, so that a soldier who kills someone is only a change of the probability, because the other person, the victim, could be dying in a car accident 5 minutes later.
Well, yes. This is exactly the core of their assault on the constitutionalism of Europe and of America.
And the situation is the early education of children will result in the same situation, because it is an addiction. They will become sex addicted. They will become a pleasure for old people, more or less. They will learn how to have sex from the earliest ages. They will learn how to make abortions, because there are NGOs already who have the target to bring this knowledge in 27 states, including abortions. So the situation is, how will these children will feel? It will be only an object. It will be only an object for pleasure. And
That's
this
right.
will make them very empty. And the point is, and this is, in my opinion, very important, because there is by this sexuality, by this early education, there is a separation to the parents. And we are not allowed to say father and mother anymore, only parent one, parent two. So this is also becoming objective. So the children, they will have traumas after traumas after traumas, which is told them as normal or as freedom.
Yes.
And they will project this pain one day in a very excessive way. And we don't know what will happen with these children when this emotion explodes.
I think that's entirely correct, Hartmut. But again, I would come back to an important clarification or in this issue, that there are two things, two layers here. One is the possibility that what we're talking about here is at some level an organic, spontaneous eruption of culture. You might say that you might hypothesize, for example, that we've seen in the last few decades the rejection of the institutional churches and so on, and that sense of repudiation of their moralism, and that kind of went then hand in glove with the whole 1960s, post-60s sexual permissiveness and liberation, and that in a sense, you might see that this, therefore, is simply some kind of extension of this, taking this to the absolute obscene limit, let's say. That's a very weak way of putting it, but you know what I mean. Yeah. But in actual fact, I don't think that is what's happening. In other words, there is no spontaneous, organic desire for any of this in the culture whatsoever, other than among a tiny minority of perverts, culturally speaking. But what's going on is that there is this creation of this idea and this whipping up of this by a combination of forces, the most powerful of which is what I call mutism, the way that the population, the adults, have been muted. You can see this all around you now compared to when you were a child. And, there were always these men in the grey suits and, the men in their working clothes. Whenever there was nonsense afoot, they were there pounding the table or pounding somebody's head in to shut them up and to get them out of there, because this was not tolerated. They're silenced now. They don't speak. They mumble into their beer maybe, but that's about as far as it goes. And this is therefore all orchestrated. What you're actually having there is a leveraging of different forces. The mutism, which is created, which is constructed, but also this kind of sense of freedom being taken to the next level, which is total freedom in a godless world. In other words, where we're going now is where the world would have gone to if God had never existed, if God had never made it, but it still had materialized in this dimension. And that's the ultimate logic of the abolition of God. from our culture formally. That if you notwithstanding what I said earlier about the residual ritualistic observation of certain religious rites and routines and rituals, nevertheless, there is in our culture also a very profound constructed, I say, implausibility of the religious idea. In other words, it is far easier for a young person growing up to disbelieve than to believe, because
Yes.
of this is a complicated question. It's it's not one that I don't know if we could get into it, but it's a very profound thing, which arises from the idea that people have constructed these false partitions of rationality around the world, which block out the mystery and block out the unfathomableness of reality and of our existence and of our own being, that we take our own being for granted in our everyday lives now, in a way that would have been impossible for our grandparents or great grandparents, because they were surrounded with an entirely different idea, the creation idea. And so therefore, it's very hard now for people to actually believe in God. And they're more easily convinced then by these people who say there is no God, get on with your life and do what you're told. And therefore, there is no law. Because ultimately all law comes from God. It's all through the natural law. That was the channel that because otherwise, if you want it, like, what is the point of being good if there is no God? That question, resonates through Europe and America in these days. And this is, I think, the deep nature. And on that score, above all other scores, the churches have been utterly derelict. They have failed to address that question completely. They have
Completely.
they have acted as though the mere ritualistic repetition of words was sufficient to reassure people and to maintain the edifice of belief.
This is my last statement, then I gave it to Drago. The interesting thing is, we live in a patriarchal world, so only everything with the father. The father is electric, the mother is magnetic. So in my opinion, we have to come to a point where we also honor the female aspect, the real female aspect of the nature as well. And the interesting thing is, for example, the Templars. The Templars were the pirates because they have to leave the country. And the Templars, they were the first communists, because if you want to join the Templars, you have to give everything to the Templars what you own, and then according to your degree or to your status, you got what you need. It's also interesting. This patriarchal world, which is run by the Templars, because this is skull and bones, are the Templars, are communists. But I won't give you to Drago.
Thank you very much, Hartmut. John, it's great to have you here in the live stream, and it's an honor to meet you in person, so to speak, although it's online. I wanted to ask you, considering the very notion of what the West is today, could we say that essentially what the modern geopolitical West is run still by the City of London and the Anglo-Saxon elite that controls most of the so-called Five Eyes countries, and the others which are essentially vassals? We see the same things that you just described in most of those countries. We see the same way to dismantle the traditional way of life, to dismantle the normal way of life. I mean, I'm not going to call it tradition, it's just normal. Do you think that it's part of the same agenda, it's part of the same geopolitical elite? And could we say, even though Ireland got its independence in 1922, if I'm not mistaken, had it ever actually been independent, or has any other nation that got its independence, formal independence from the British Crown, has it ever really been independent?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Drago, it's one I've kind of pondered a long time, and I mean I've discussed it with people and so on, and certainly my belief is, although it's a belief based on speculation to some extent and suspicion and also circumstantial evidence, that what you say is correct, that in the Irish context that the British never left, or the English rather. It's the English as opposed, although it's also the British. They are the British in a certain sense, but you know it's not the Welsh and it's not the Scots. You know, it's that, you know, as you say, that Anglo-Saxon rump of the imperial, the British Empire, and you know, it's very interesting because I just remarked the other day, and I've been on Twitter for the last few months since I went for election, and I'm still on. But so I did a tweet which was like that: in Irish history, we were always told, the Irish people were always told, you don't own Ireland. You know, you are serfs. You know, you should be lucky to get fed and to be tolerated, provided you do what you're told and keep your mouth shut. And here we are again now. They say you own nothing, and you better be happy, or we're going to do something about it. You know, we'll put you at peace. And I think that's very, very real. I mean, that certainly is one of the elements that I imagine myself including in that term, the combine. You know, the residual British Empire, which it seems to be in this whole thing is actually in some way superior even to the United States of America and its deep state. That element seems to actually be, if you look at what happened in Ukraine, where you had this Boris Johnson going to Ukraine to basically prevent Zelensky 2 years ago, more than two and a half years ago, trying to prevent Zelensky negotiating a peace with Putin. You can see that the tentacles of the British Empire are still all over the place. And certainly, yeah, I do think that is the case. And ultimately, you know, what's going on here is that we are being brought to a new world, a new neo-feudal world. I mean, which the moment derives from the fact that we have reached the end of labor in history, in a sense, human labor, because of technology and its possibilities. And that moment has been stolen in advance by a very tiny minority of elite tech, Silicon Valley, etc., tech moguls. And they now control the means of production, that great Marxian phrase, which we didn't really pay attention to in the broader context. I think it would have been provident if we had, maybe 30 years ago, started to ask questions. If you remember, back in the 1980s, any of you were old enough to remember that time. I remember it very well. I was an editor of various magazines at that point in Ireland, left-leaning by and large, you know, in that soft, soggy, left liberal sense. At the time, it was the fashionable thing, and Ireland was still in the, as we thought, in the doldrums. But we carried lots and lots of articles in the mid-80s about the future of work, the future of human meaning, the future of human dignity. These questions arising from the coming anticipated technological revolution. And then something happened that stopped. Two things happened, actually. Well, first of all, it stopped. And it didn't, nobody realized, nobody missed it, I think, because why? Because suddenly we were rich. The world was rich. Europe was rich. America was rich. The Reagan boom was happening, you know. Blair then came into Britain. And it was like, you know, nobody talked about technology anymore. It all went underground. And then the prosperity lasted for, what, 20 or 25 years, and then it stopped. And then a few years later, these guys, under, bizarrely, Henry Kissinger, emerged to say, well, we've sorted it all out. You don't have to worry about it anymore because we now control the entirety of the technology. And we've decided that we're going to divide the world up into us and you. We'll be the guys who own the control the technology, and you'll be the guys who'll just do what you're told. All right? Any questions? And that's what happened. And now we are in a situation where they have lined up their central bank digital currencies. They've created a massive crime over the last 50 years, by the way, and well, not at all, by the way, with their fake money, which has been untethered from the gold standard and untethered from human endeavor and so on, and just basically turned into tokens at a roulette table. And they've all made lots of paper money. And for the last couple of years now, they've been assiduously converting this paper money into concrete assets, buying up land. And that's what the whole climate thing is really about, to create this scare that they need to kind of commandeer the land and to protect it from humanity and blah, blah. But they'll end up owning it all. And this is all happening. And now we're on this point where they probably certainly they say, and I think there's no doubt about this, within the term of the next president of the United States, this will happen, that the entirety of the economies and currencies of the West will collapse and will be replaced by this central bank digital currency, universal basic income, which is, in other words, a pittance, which will be given to each of us to keep our mouths shut, provided we do. And that the rest, everything then will be controlled and owned, and everything will be tokenized by the elites. In other words, they will claim every last blade of grass, every last leaf on every tree, every last drop of rainwater in the world as an asset owned by them, which they will then rent out to the people, provided they are well behaved and silent. This is where we are. This is the neo-feudal world. I mean, there's a guy called Joel Kotkin, actually. It's very interesting. He's an American academic, and he wrote a book in 2020. He's a left-winger, but he clearly bought into the whole COVID thing. But he wrote a book about neo-feudalism, and everything he said is what's happening. Everything he said is what's happening, but he didn't understand the context. I reviewed it at the time, one of the first articles I wrote on my Substack when I started, because I'd read this book and I thought it was extraordinary, that he understood everything about them except the method that they were using to do this, and that it was already in train. So that's what's now happening, and we're now in the last phases of the pretense, I think. What do we call the pretense, where they're still pretending to be democratic and so on. It's very thin pretense at this point, but in most cases, but this is the last of it. And then one day they will appear with their fangs and their boots. And then we will need to have a plan.
I also wanted to ask you regarding the possible change in the power structure in the United States. If we consider the fact that they've invested a lot into preventing Donald Trump from becoming president, is it really possible that he's going to change things, especially given the fact that you also mentioned that the City of London, that the Anglo-Saxon elite also is above the deep state in the United States, which essentially I agree with, because we see there's a lot of evidence for that. We see that the military-industrial complex in the United States essentially is working in concert with the plans of the Anglo-Saxon elite. So is it possible? I mean, could we expect that Trump is going to make some groundbreaking changes that the rest of us might simply use to our advantage in our own countries, especially here in Europe?
Well, I would certainly hope so, but what I'm going to say will be deeply contradictory, inherently contradictory, because I don't have a clear view of what Trump is or what he represents. I have generally good feeling about him. I'm more optimistic than I am cynical about him. But nevertheless, I have reservations to do with his attitude to the warp speed project and the vaccines and so on. But at the same time, I have been saying what I say from a starting point is, well, to anybody who complains about Trump, I say, well, okay, so if you were an American, you would vote for Kamala Harris, would you? Are you that crazy? So like that more or less decides it. It's at that banal and basic level that I think you just say your prayers and just vote for Donald Trump. That's the only way I think that we can advise Americans in this matter. But you see, Trump is much bigger than Trump. And this is the vital thing that I think everybody misses, or not everybody, but you know, I miss it too sometimes. You start to talk about the man rather than the dance that he has created, which is the deplorable dance. And this is that he has liberated 50% of the population of the United States of America from the scrap heap. He has rescued them from the scrap heap because they were dumped there by the Democratic Party, who abandoned them. And because exactly what I said earlier about the end of labor, that because human labor had reached the end of its natural life, that these people were absolute now and redundant. And Trump said, no, these are my people, and I treasure them, and they treasured him. And you can see that what is there at the heart of this is real. No matter what else argument you have about the vaccines or whatever it is, you look at that relationship and it's not fake. So that for me is sufficient. I don't know how the questions are going to be answered when the time comes, but I am prepared to actually wait and see, because I do think that at the very least, Donald Trump will be answerable, will be accountable to his people. And as a result, we will all have a sense, those of us who share their worldview and their outlook on reality, we will feel that, our questions will be answered. And so that's another aspect of it that I think is very important. I mean, the reservations we have are the usual ones, that he does seem to, in some way, be playing their game. I heard for years there were these stories going around that, the story about the white hats, and that Trump was the champion of the white hats, and he's put out there to front up their whole revolution and so on, and that when the time comes, the traps will be sprung and the villains will all be put in jail and we will all live happily ever after. I stopped believing in that one a few years back. I did believe in it briefly, the Q story and all that. But I honestly do think that notwithstanding all of the propaganda banked against him and all the lawfare and all the hatred, that Donald Trump remains strong, and that he is a good man fundamentally in his heart, and that he will not betray his own people above all. He will not betray the people who place their trust in him. So, I am hopeful on that score.
Thank you. I mean, I also think the same. I don't think he's going to be able to make some groundbreaking changes because the deep state is too powerful, and he will have a lot of resistance from them. But I think the very fact that he's going to be there as a roadblock towards further destruction of our normal life, I think that's more than enough. And I think, as you said, just comparing him to Kamala Harris it's just ridiculous to even compare it as like a viable political candidate any sane person would vote for. So
no, it's not an option. I mean, if Harris is elected, really, that's the end, isn't it? I mean, that's a continuation of the last 4 years, and that's the last thing that the world needs or can bear. I don't think the world could survive 4 years of Kamala Harris. I mean, and where would all of the things we've talked about go to in that period if she was allowed? We know that Donald Trump will not proceed with most of those agendas. We know that they will stop. And so that's got to be, no matter what you think and what your fears are about how compromised he may be or how weak he may be or how fearful he may be. I mean, I don't think he's very fearful. He's already had an attempt on his life, which people on our side question that this was real. I don't. I believe it was real. And, I know that's a warning to him that, they can do it again and maybe next time they won't miss. But I think he's a very brave man. I mean, he knows the risks and he's taking them. So I think it would be, I don't see an option. He's the best. He's the only show in town, and everybody of good heart in the world needs to look to him and pray that he succeeds.
Yep. I mean, I've also seen a lot of people claiming that the assassination attempt was staged, which I think is definitely not the case, because we see that the deep state is essentially run by these lunatics who are ready to start wars around the world and are even pushing us towards some sort of a nuclear conflict, albeit it could be limited, or at least they're hoping it to be limited. It could escalate to a global level. But either way, I think we see that in the insanity that rules these elites, it's the evidence that they're ready to do much worse things than the potential assassination of Trump. So I definitely think that it wasn't staged, because, I mean, it's very difficult to stage something like that, to stage a bullet going inches, millimeters from somebody's head. So that's very, very difficult to stage.
No, you would take multiple rehearsals and multiple takes in order for it to,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, I think there is a kind of a certain mentality on our side now that wants to kind of disintegrate everything before it even happens, and I don't think it's all that helpful. Everything is fake, everything is false. I mean, we need some solid ground to put our feet on, and I don't think that's really helping us really very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Drago.
Scott, welcome. Now I got you. I'm proud to introduce you to John.
Hello, Scott.
Good to see you, son.
Lieutenant Scott Bennett, and he was just our guest last week. And so he's been doing great work as a political commentator. And I'm just proud that he was able to come and help us feature you, John. So I'll give it to Scott.
Well, I was born in Scotland, John, so I value your Celtic character and strength of heart. I would just add, this is not a typical election, and I think everyone is talking about this. This is not a typical election. This is not any kind of an election we've ever had in the United States before. This is not politics or divisions or policy differences. This is, at this point, this juncture in time, the moment where the American Republic either sinks beneath the waves and emerges as some bastardized Bolshevik, communist, left-wing, tyrannical, fascist, retard state full of vaccinations and controlled narratives of information and wokeism and homosexuality and transgenderism and climate change and bug eating and every other form of evil. This is the moment where America becomes all of that evil and disgusting subhuman demoniology, if you will, or does not, and rejects that and overthrows that and rebuilds upon the ashes and the ruins of this wokeism and left-wing ideology. And this is why the left is so fanatical. And I use the term left as a general characteristic, but they're not even leftists. They're not liberals. These are fascist, wokist, delusional schizophrenics. Who else but a schizophrenic could say you could cut off the penises of your little boys and the breasts of your little girls and call it dignified and human rights and you're finding your own identity? Nothing but monstrous, evil people with an evil agenda, population control. I won't be surprised if everyone in Gaza who got that polio shot is dead in a matter of weeks. We're witnessing a genocide unlike any other time in history. And the American Republic and the American politicians under the Biden administration have blood dripping from their hands. We're witnessing biochemical labs in Ukraine that is directly linked to this COVID-19 pandemic that they tried to shut down everyone and turn them into lobotomized retards. The war against Russia in Ukraine. All of these things, I think, are slowly becoming unraveled. And as a result, there's enormous desperation and paranoia and hysteria and violence about to and currently being unleashed by these totalitarians that claim to be in political power. But I think that, too, is an illusion, because when they undermine the Republican form of government of the United States and the Constitution, they no longer have any authority. They no longer have any government power. As an officer of the United States Army, they are domestic terrorists to me. And my duty as an officer in the United States Army was to uphold, preserve, and protect and defend the Constitution for the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And this is what more and more and more people in the military ranks and the retired ranks, everyone above the age of 45 to 105. And I would put a Korean War veteran against any of these rainbow flag woke junior officers any time of the day, because they have a deep-rooted love of country and tradition and history that the modern generation has had burned out of them and lobotomized out of them and castrated out of them. So we're going to witness a tremendous clash in the next few months, and I'll just end it by saying the Department of Justice waging war against RT is an attempt to shut down the information narratives, again with the tired, silly, the Russians did it, the Chicken Little paranoia. It's not working. It's not going to work. It never worked. So you're seeing, I think, this delusional shift that the Christopher Wrays and the Merrick Garlands and all of these puppets in Washington think they're going to get away with this, think the American public are going to be subservient, and I don't think they are. I think this could result in another revolutionary war, a American split. No one wants civil war, but when the other side, when certain branches of America become so fascistic, so tyrannical, so destructive, so suicidal, so mad, like a mad dog trying to devour your children and break into your house, you have no option other than to put it down. You can isolate it, you can contain it, but eventually it has to be put down. And this is the conclusion that the last few years, I think, has really matured the American public into understanding. At least 60 to 70% of the American public know there's something wrong. I'd say 30% are ready for taking up arms, not to engage in insurrection or violence, but to defend themselves, their family, and their property from violence. Again, the Constitution of the Declaration of Independence says when a government becomes tyrannical and destructive of the people's rights, it is the right and the duty of the people to overthrow such government and reconstitute one which seems convenient unto them. I think we could see the emergence of a new American republic that sets up new embassies in Russia, new embassies elsewhere. This could domino into the new Republic of Ireland, new Republic of Scotland, new Republic of England, new Republic of France, where these portions of the same conservative traditional values areas of America and Europe re-incline towards peace with Russia, re-incline because of the traditional values we share, and end this endless hostility, endless war agenda that started, you could say, in the 1990s, but really quickened after 2000 and the false flag events of 9/11. But there is a tremendous transformation about to happen. And I'll end it by saying I won't be surprised if Kamala Harris separates from being vice president to run for president alone. Gavin Newsom is appointed Joe Biden's vice president. Joe Biden then dies or something else happens to him, making Gavin Newsom automatically the president before the election. And then he appoints Barack Obama as his vice president, which he can do. Then Kamala Harris is taken out, assassinated by a Trump supporter who watches RT. And then you have some sort of a suppression, suspension of the election, martial law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, with a background noise of attacks or disruptions or nuclear events in America, or Ukraine or Iran or all of the above. I hope it doesn't happen, but we need to be prepared for the nightmare scenario, because we're looking at people that really are the embodiment of the demoniac, and reflect upon that biblical lesson. The demoniac raging and cutting himself and living in the tombs and eating the dead corpses. This is what the modern Democrat, Lindsey Graham, rhino establishment, American government is all about. And we have to, and we are and will overthrow and divorce and kick off the dirt from our feet and walk away from it. So I'll end it there.
Yes, I think what you say, Scott, is so true, and it reminds me of to finish the what I said about Trump, really, that it's not just about America, it's about the whole world, because for the last 4 years and intermittently before that, America has ceased to be the defender of the free world and of liberty and all of those things in the world. In fact, on the contrary, in particular in the last 4 years, it has been the enemy of freedom in the world, and the only hope that the world has, because ultimately the rest of the free world is really in a terrible state. It's demoralized. It's emasculated. It's weakened. It's terrified. It's afraid to open its mouth. It's muted, lockjawed, and the quality of American manhood remains pretty strong, I have to say, from what I see from this remove. I mean, not all of it, and of course we've seen the other side too, but there is greater evidence of residual capacity to fight for principle and for right in America and by American than there is anywhere else in the world, in the free world. And that would be my hope, because frankly on my darker days I despair of the possibility that Ireland and these other countries of Europe can defend themselves, never mind defend the world. But I think America can, and I hope that will become possible if it is necessary. If these people want to fight, I think they will get it, and that the people who support Donald Trump, and they support him for reasons that read to me, and I'm sure to all of you, in a different way than they read to the average reader of the New York Times or the Guardian or the Irish Times, which is completely contaminated with propaganda, and that they have the possibility to do what is necessary, which is to restore democracy, to restore freedom, to give back to the people their own countries, which have been taken from them, even though they may not even know that this has happened. I can tell them for sure it has happened, and that moment may be much closer than we already know or believe. Yeah, I think that is a real possibility. I mean, it has always seemed to me very strange, Scott, and it's not strange isn't the right word, but puzzling and confounding, that the people that you expected to step out of the shadows in the last 4 years, for example, since this obscenity was mounted against the peoples of the world, of the West in particular, that out of the shadows would step those great figures represented by John Wayne in the movies and Clint Eastwood and so on. And those people were not, those characters, of course, were based on real people. And those people must still exist. And yet they too have been silenced by and large in this whole escapade. That they're, for some reason, maybe holding their powder dry, literally as well as figuratively. I hope that's the explanation. I pray that when that happens, that we too, the peoples of Europe and the peoples of Australia and New Zealand, and will step up and find our own courage to match that of the American American manhood, because I don't doubt that will be forthcoming when the moment comes.
I want to mention one difference between America and Europe, because I had a nice conversation with a business partner 2 days ago, and he told me that in the Netherlands you are not allowed to carry even pepper spray with you, or you're not allowed to have any knife with you. Yeah. So in the United States, the people have weapons, and
Yes.
in Germany, for example, because of we had here a killing of 3 people on a festival. Now they are also making the new laws against carrying weapons, carrying knives, etc. So the point is, the people are not allowed to carry anything.
Yes.
And to, let's say it this way, the strategy of Mahatma Gandhi in the today's world with these mercenaries as police forces doesn't work.
No.
And so this is
Very
a
real
big problem that we are facing here in Europe. And the United States will not rescue Europe. They have to do a lot by themselves. And Europe is standing for themselves.
But perhaps under a new administration in Washington, that may change. That I think that the moment will be so raw and so real that all of us will have to revise our prejudices and our ideas and start over, because we were literally fighting for our lives and for our children's lives and for the life of our civilization.
Let me add this commentary from viewers, and it's also in relation to the recent topic about Trump and the upcoming election. So the viewer said, Trump just announced a plan for a 15% tax rate and use Elon Musk for a federal audit. And that's a 15% corporate tax. That's a big one to bring back the economy. And he writes further, it appears for Trump to win, he has to overcome the corrupt media in bed with the Obama administration. And can you believe Alexa's response when asking opinions of Donald Trump and Harris and who it would recommend to vote for? So I don't know if I've seen that video clip that was really funny when someone asked about, we said, why do we have to vote for Trump and why do we have to vote for Kamala? And it just goes to show the forces against Trump when they even control Google Alexa. And I said, not in New York City or New Jersey, very strict laws on carrying weapons. You have to go to the Southwest Texas.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the censorship thing is quite shocking and so on. But I mean, I think that notwithstanding that you know, there's a sufficiency of American consciousness now to turn this around. That's my feeling. That barring some appalling episode between now and election day, which is only 2 months hence, that I think the American people, and I don't think the same opportunities, anything like them, will exist for fraud as existed the last time. I think there's more vigilance, and there's also a limitation on postal voting compared to the last time and so on. So unless they create some other distraction, some diversion, I don't think they can pull a stunt like they pulled the last time. So I'm cautiously hopeful. But as I say, this is not just an ordinary election where, you know, if your side loses, you shrug and go on. This is, as Scott said, this is the end of everything. If Kamala Harris wins this, or if the Democrats get back for another 4 years, the free world is over.
I have one question for Scott, since he was in the military and since he was in high levels and high places, as we say. My sources in the Russian military told me years ago that in August 2021, when there was the meeting between the Russian and the U.S. General Staff, I think it was in Geneva, if I'm not mistaken, there was word of biological warfare. And Gerasimov apparently told Milley that if any more of these mysterious illnesses, and not just on humans, but also on animals and plants, appear in Russia, that the U.S. would consider, that Russia would consider U.S. as an enemy, and it would consider the U.S. and Russia to be in a state of war, and that Russia would be ready to use nuclear weapons. And then suddenly all these things stopped happening. There was a massive decrease in the number of mysterious deaths and illnesses in the Caucasus region, because there were some labs in Georgia, and also in the region next to Ukraine. However, in January, there was another increase in all of this, and then the Russians decided to start the special military operation, as they call it. So do you think this is true? Do you think there is some merit to it?
Well, I know it's true. I did the initial RT report and Press TV reports, which is another reason they're trying to shut down RT. We did an analytical documentary on the biochemical labs that were established in Ukraine. I think it was like 46 of them, starting with the Lugar Institute in 2007, 2008, when Senator Dick Lugar and Barack Obama went over to Georgia and set up this first one and then replicated them elsewhere. There's been an entire campaign to confiscate and take over the former Russian biological research laboratories and other things since the 1990s. And this goes back to Project 721 or 751. I think it was the Japanese Biological Chemical Weapons Division that was brought over, like Operation Paperclip, to the United States. The Japanese did horrendous things during World War II, which resonates with an old Scottish uncle that I had who was in the March to Bataan, who said the Japanese do not belong to the human race in his Scottish brogue, but he meant it because he saw some of the things they did. But they definitely began a chemical weapons biological program, and then began specifically targeting Russian DNA, Russian Slavic DNA. And I remember Alexander Dugin came over to Iran in 2018. I was there with him. We sat down for breakfast. We were at the conference, New Horizons conference, and he presented material about these biological weapons factories and other things, and said there's going to be a war over this. And it resonates with what you've just mentioned with General Asimov. And no doubt they would have nuked the facilities in Ukraine if this, it got out of control. And, the other thing is direct connection to Joe Biden, direct connection to Hunter Biden. Metabiota was previously called the Global Viral Forecasting Institute. It changed its name to Metabiota. It was then financially backed by Rosemont Seneca, which had Nancy Pelosi's son involved, Hunter Biden, of course, John Kerry's son, Mitt Romney's son. They always use their children for filters of financial corruption and enrichment. But this was what was in the heart of Ukraine, besides organ harvesting and child sex trafficking, these biological chemical weapons development programs. It was shut down by the Russian special military operation, but it was also used, and all of the documents are there. CIA, USAID, the United States government, low intensity conflict, the Department of Defense, all participating in this this venture, partnering with Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, a variety of other pharmaceutical companies, to then send profits and material back to the Democrat Party, back to the Clinton Foundation, back to the Bill Gates Foundation, Project 201, the Klaus Schwab New Open Society Foundation, the World Economic Forum. They were all part of these Ukrainian biolab situations. And they were purchasing large swaths of land in Ukraine, which I think Russia is going to nullify, tear up, and destroy all of those purchases and confiscations of Ukrainian sources as they push through and eventually bulldoze everything that remains of the Zelensky Nazi pagan regime. That will also be assisted by Ukrainians who are objecting to the outlawing of the Ukrainian National Orthodox Church. So Ukraine is going to, I think, have a civil war that will result in the overthrow of Zelensky and all of these pagans and Nazis that will probably venture over to Britain or Germany to set up a government in exile. But I think that's going to be extinguished by a hypersonic missile strike as well. But all of the chemical weapons issues were real. And I think Russia has presented this to the United Nations Security Council. I think they will continue to present this to the world. And as it rolls through and gathers more material, which undoubtedly it has, it's just not presenting all of its cards. You're going to see the vast majority of the world turn against the United States because this COVID-19 thing in particular, and who knows how many other biological weapons accidents or intentional releases have traumatized the rest of the world. And that's what the American government is increasingly being viewed as, a traumatizer of the world, not a liberator, not a leader, but a traumatizer, a torturer, a rapist, and a cannibal. And I think the world is going to drop the dollar, and you will see an implosion of the U.S. government, which will then initiate all sorts of domestic civil reorganization, and a breakup of the United States into regional city-states like the Florence Italian republics, I think, is inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, regarding the biolabs and bioweapons they're using, as far as I know, Europe is mostly R1-2 and R1b haplogroups. So if I'm not mistaken, what they did is they used R1a, which is mostly the Slavic group, haplogroup, to construct these ethnic-based bioweapons. However, as we all know, bioweapons tend to mutate because they're not really controllable. I mean, even if you have a nuclear weapon, it's controllable, except of course the radiation. However, if we consider the fact that the vast majority of Europeans or native Europeans are genetically connected, what prevents the virus or whatever the bioweapon is from mutating and killing most of us here in Europe? I mean, you might kill the Russians, right? But then you might kill yourself as well, because you have no idea how the thing is going to mutate. And also because we're all humans, it could mutate further and kill a bunch of other people.
Well, let me just add to that. Another crime against humanity is the United States trying to facilitate a nuclear explosion at the various nuclear power plants. They just tried to invade Kursk for that very purpose. Think about this. The United States of America and its proxy Ukraine have been consciously trying to blow up a nuclear power plant that would harm, if not decimate, Europe. And the European people think what about that? The United States just blew up the Nord Stream pipeline that will decimate and destroy the German Republic. And what are the Germans doing? Besides wallowing in their self-flagellation for World War II, they're nothing but slaves. And so is so much of Europe. And I hope and pray for a rebirth. But there should be no illusions of the level of evil and deceit that is coming out of the United States, and offends me more than anyone else, because I consider myself an American. I was born in Scotland. I have a Scottish family, but I was raised in American. My father was an American Marine Corps aviator in Vietnam. And to see this coming out of America, the harm, the war, the violence that we're trying to do to Europe, in the name of democracy of Zelensky in Ukraine, which is all a lie anyway, every European should be clamoring to say, get every American embassy, every American consulate, and every American passport out of Europe, because that's the only way we're going to safeguard ourselves from spies and this military-industrial complex NATO tragedy that is on the verge of destroying nuclear power plants and worse. Europe has nothing to fear from Russia, nothing to fear from Iran, and nothing to fear from China. The only thing it has to fear is the United States, which is looking to enslave Europe as a colony by destroying its economy and thereby propping up the empty U.S. dollar. That's the hard, ugly truth.
I think I agree 100%. And I think what the other danger is that they're essentially doing everything they can to radicalize the Russians. And the point is, the Russians have been very, very tolerant of everything that's been going on. I'm not sure if the United States would not use a nuclear weapon if it were in the place of Russia. If everything that's been going on, and it seems to me they're trying to push the Russians to become these sort of crazies. And most people think that, I don't know, Putin is some sort of a dictator, some sort of a right-wing, insane guy who wants to enslave the world, and so on and so on. However, I think Putin is a centrist at worst. Yeah. And I think if there's if there is a chance for Russia to become an aggressive country, it needs to remove Putin first. They would need to get some insane ultra right-wing Russian, even though that sort of ideology is not very popular in Russia, as far as I know. They would have to try to create a situation where the Russians would become like this. And then
I've been to Russia. I've been to Russia all over the place, and I'll tell you, temperamentally, they're very conservative. They're very Christian. They're very traditional. They are not. They don't have a high boiling point. They are a very low key, deeply rooted people that would rather endure injury than injure others. And our problem has been we've always projected upon Russia our own paranoia, schizophrenia, and viciousness that doesn't exist in Russia. So they're not the kind of people that will react that way. But when you invade Russia, they'll push you not only out, but way back beyond and behind your own lines to make sure you don't ever do it again, or it takes a long time. And that's what they're going to do in this case. But the Russians, and I'm not applauding Russia, I'm just saying, making a psychological profile of them. They are a very low-key, calm people. And although people like Medvedev may have a sharp-toothed, serrated edge to him, that's for demonstrations to the enemy. But when he comes back to his own Russian people, he assumes the same posture, temperament, and tonality that resonate with their people. Russians are now very alert and very smart and always watchful of tyrannical personalities and such. They will never endure or tolerate another Stalin, and they look at Putin as a sort of Peter the Great, czarist, leader that is not only holding Russia together, but really solidifying and strengthening it, and guiding its evolution as the leader of the free world. If you listen to what the Mongolian president said, he just affirmed that. President Putin, you are the leader of the free world. I think that's resonated to North Korea. China is a little quiet about it, but China doesn't have any charisma or personality. Russians do. China can, build bridges and do the Belt and Road Initiative and do all sorts of economic development that people enjoy. But for charisma and personality and just a bubbly effervescence, Russia has that. Sadly, the United States has lost all of its ability to be diplomats. There's no charisma. There's no diplomacy. There's no Reagan-esque decorum or style to America anymore in our government ranks, except perhaps my generation that can remember the example of Reagan. And even the old ones, but I think they're too old, the Kennedy ones. So I do agree with some of the analysis that Generation X, those born from 1968 to 1979, they're going to emerge as the new leaders of the United States and reincarnate a Kennedy, Reagan, philosophical and political orientation of America. And do it by any means necessary, because we realize the depth, again, of violence and madness that animates the other side, and we can't tolerate them.
All good questions. I have a quick question from an audience. Why did they dismantle the neutron bomb? US and Russia agreed to dismantle them. Is NATO part of it?
As far as I know, they have it. They have the technology to use them. Neutron bombs, as far as I know, are used primarily as anti-personnel weapons, which means they're designed to mostly kill biological things and beings, essentially. So the neutron bomb exists. They're not deployed. They're not part of the military anymore, but they do exist as a concept, and they could be returned as viable military weapons at some point. However, I hope it's never going to happen, because I couldn't imagine a more inhumane weapon than a neutron bomb. Perhaps a biological weapon would be worse, but a neutron bomb is horrible.
Thank you. Everything, all good points. John, do you have any last words for us and to our audience, and how they can get in touch with you? And my personal point of view is that if the ancient civilizations like China and Russia and Iran, especially China and Russia, can uncover themselves or can get out of the deep rotten hole that they've been, they've suffered so much for centuries. I think we can do it also. America, Ireland, Philippines, and it's just sad that they keep using the Philippines as a proxy because it's an ally. But if they can do it, we can do it also. Okay, so John.
Well, just to say this, that in all of these countries, in all of the countries we speak of, a trick has been pulled on the people, whereby, if you just criticize America, you are seen as being anti-American. But in reality, what you are talking about is the entity that has imposed itself within America, on America, and therefore on the world. And that is happening right throughout the whole free world, where what you're actually having now is people who are democratically protesting the state of their country and what's being done to their people are accused of being anti-democracy and anti-Irish and anti-American and anti-British and so on. Whereas in reality, what's actually happened is the incumbent governments have redefined the reality and the meaning of democracy. What they're actually saying is democracy is the state and the present incumbents of that state. In other words, the people who just happened to be there when the coup was conducted, they're democracy forever. And that's the trick that is now being used. And the media in the world are allowing this trick to pass muster, so that no attention is being drawn to the semantic difference that exists between the actual nation of Ireland, the country that is Ireland, the state that is Ireland, and the incumbent government, which is actually a puppet government acting on behalf of our outside interests. That's something that we all need to be aware of in this. When we criticize America, we're not criticizing America. We're criticizing the manifestation of America in the world, in the political world at the present moment. And if that changes, I'll be the happiest person in the world. I desperately want it to happen, because I think in a certain sense, in the conditions that we're in at the moment, it's the best way. It may not be the sole way of saving the world. There may be a longer term way, but I think it's the most immediate way that we're going to resolve things.
Well, thank you, everyone. Anyone more? But if nothing else, we thank everyone. And John, everyone can get in touch with John at John Waters Substack, and it's
johnwaters.substack.com. Yes, johnwaters.substack.com is where you get me. Thank you.
And it's also called Unchained.
Okay. Yes.
Unchained. And do support all our guests. And for Lieutenant Scott Bennett, you could get in touch with him at greatawakeningstv.com, and he does. And I'll let Scott talk about the destroycancer.com.
Well, destroy-cancer.com is a cancer-destroying natural supplement that we provide to people. I used it for a cancer. It's made by American Indians. You put a little bit on top of a skin cancer, and it dissolves it and destroys it and scabs it and expels it from the body within 2 weeks, 30 days. You put it on for 4 days, you stop, it scabs, and it falls off. You can also take it internally. It goes after cancer in the body, scabs it, and it purges it. A friend of mine used it for blood leukemia. Cancer stores started coming out. It's really a miraculous substance. So just go to destroy-cancer.com. And this is the other thing, finally. We're in a society where the pharmaceutical companies make so much money off of cancer, giving chemo, giving radiation, giving surgery. And there are so many other ways to destroy cancer, but it's all covered up. And this, these American Indians, the people who make it, have been attacked by the FDA. But I used it, and it did miraculous healing on me. And it truly is amazing. So if anybody has any questions, you can contact me there. And thank you, Grace, for having such a wonderful show. Thank you all, gentlemen, for your wonderful inspiration as intellectual leaders. And John, thank you for making the Irish poetic tongue and the fearless courage of what the Irish represents so manifest in your own heroic discussion today. And with people like this on this call, I know we will win. And I look to the future with great hope and optimism and fearlessness.
And young man, Drago, why don't you invite them to all your different
Yeah,
links?
I'm a military analyst, a military and geopolitical analyst. I write for the info BRICS. I have my own Telegram channel. It's Terra Fun House. So I mean, it's in the description. People can find me there. So that's pretty much it.
And of course, Roy, how about you say something more about your Awakening podcast?
Yeah, well, you find everything on my name, roycollin.com. I've got 6 podcasts, but the Awakening one is awakeningpodcast.org. And I mean, I've experienced all the censorship, kicked off every single thing, which means that what I'm saying is true, just like the rest of the people on the panel here.
And the last but not the least, Hartmut.
Yeah, thank you so much. I work as international commodity trader, and for this reason, I have access to this financial market and to the, let's say, a little bit to the politicians. And for this reason, it's a very big honor to be here and to discuss the situation on this very high level. In my opinion, it's a very pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
And yours truly. So I'm your source if you want not to have cancer. Okay, so Scott will be, when you have cancer, go to Scott. Before, if you don't want any cancer, contact me at graceasagra.com, but definitely graceasagra at ymail. It's much better, and just email me, because we could do quantum resonance supplements. I am a registered nurse forever and ever, for decades already, and bringing indigenous medicine with me. Thank you very much. And if you like this conversation, please remember to give a thumbs up, and don't forget to share, don't forget to subscribe, and always do your part also, okay? Because we want you to do your part while we do our part. This is our strength. I'm sure you do. You have your strength. Again, thank you so much, John, and thank you for everyone. Time is always crazy,
Thank you
and and God bless.
God bless.
God bless.
God bless.